New York City, the most powerful city on earth. 8 million people live here, packed into 5 boroughs across 302 square miles of concrete, steel, and ambition. Thousands arrive every single year chasing a dream, a better life, a big break, a chance to build something that lasts. But for a very small number of families, a number you could count on 2 hands, New York was never a dream. It was an inheritance. These are the families that did not come to New York to make it. They came to New York and built it. Their names are carved into the sides of buildings, hospitals, universities, and museums. Their money flows through the institutions that govern daily life. Their decisions, made in boardrooms most people will never see, shape the economy of the city and the country. And most people have no idea. Today, we're going inside 5 dynasties that have ruled their wealth, how they kept it, how they protected it, and what they still control today. Quietly, carefully, and with the kind of patience that only comes when you have been doing this for over 100 years. This is not a list of the richest people in New York right now. This is something different. This is the story of the families that never left. Welcome to the Wealth Vault. Let's open the door. No name in American history carries more weight than Rockefeller. Not Carnegie, not Morgan, not Vanderbilt. Those names built industries and left behind buildings. The Rockefellers did something different. They built a system, a way of doing business so powerful, so total, so ruthless in its efficiency, that it didn't just dominate one industry. It changed the rules of how capitalism in America was allowed to work. And then, when the government forced them to stop, they reinvented themselves so completely that their power became invisible. That is when it became permanent. To understand the Rockefeller dynasty, you have to go back to 1839. John Davison Rockefeller was born in Richford, a small town in upstate New York, the second of 6 children. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a traveling salesman and a con man. He would ride into towns selling herbal cures and patent medicines that didn't work, billing himself as a cancer specialist. He was charming, unreliable, and largely absent. His mother, Eliza, was the opposite. Deeply religious, disciplined, frugal, she raised John in the Baptist church and instilled in him a belief that money was not the enemy of God, but a tool for doing God's work. From a very young age, John showed a talent for numbers and a discipline around money that was extraordinary for a child. He kept a personal ledger from the age of 16, recording every cent he earned and every cent he gave away to his church. That ledger still exists. When he landed his first real job as an assistant bookkeeper at a merchant firm called Hewitt & Tuttle, he earned 50 cents a day. He saved everything he could. He gave 10% to charity. He invested the rest. By the time he was 20, he and a partner had launched a commodity trading business that in its first year grossed $450,000. That was enormous money in 1859. Rockefeller was not yet 30, and he was already a wealthy man. But the moment that changed everything was not a business decision. It was a technological one. In 1859, the first successful commercial oil well was drilled in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Kerosene suddenly became the fuel that lit lamps across America. Oil was about to become the most valuable commodity in the world. Rockefeller saw it immediately. In 1863, he invested in his first oil refinery near Cleveland. Within 2 years, he bought out his partners. In 1870, he incorporated the Standard Oil Company of Ohio with his brother William and a few associates. And then he did something that no one in American business had done before. He went to war against everyone. Rockefeller understood that the chaos of the oil industry, the wild fluctuations in price, the dozens of competing refineries undercutting each other, was the problem. Order was the solution, and he was going to impose it. Within just the first 3 months of 1872, Standard Oil bought out, shut down, or bankrupted 22 of its 26 competitors in Cleveland. He offered a price, his price, not theirs. Take it or be destroyed. Most took it. But the method that gave Standard Oil its true power was a secret arrangement with the railroads. In exchange for guaranteeing enormous, steady shipments of oil, Rockefeller negotiated freight rates far lower than any competitor could access. His rivals were paying full price to ship their oil. Standard Oil was paying a fraction. And sometimes, and this is what made it truly devastating, the railroads were secretly paying Standard Oil a rebate on every barrel its competitors shipped. Rockefeller was making money every time a rival used the railroad to compete against him.
When journalist Ida Tarbell exposed this in 1904 in her landmark investigation of Standard Oil, the country was outraged. The New York World had already called Standard Oil, in 1880, the most cruel, impudent, pitiless, and grasping monopoly that ever fastened upon a country. By 1882, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of all oil refining in the United States. 90%. One company, one family. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was a monopoly in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and ordered it to be broken into 34 separate companies. It was the most significant antitrust action in American history. People celebrated in the streets. But here is the part nobody tells you. When Standard Oil was broken up, Rockefeller still owned shares in all 34 of the successor companies. The breakup didn't destroy his wealth. It multiplied it. As those companies competed, grew, and became the oil giants of the 20th century,
including ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and BP in part, the value of Rockefeller's stake exploded. By 1916, he had become America's first billionaire. Some financial historians estimate that at his peak, adjusted for the size of the American economy at the time, Rockefeller was the equivalent of a $400 billion person in today's money. More than Elon Musk, more than Jeff Bezos. He was the richest private individual in the history of the modern world. But here is what the Rockefeller story becomes after that. Because most dynasties at this point, after a founding patriarch dies and his fortune is divided, begin to fade. The Rockefellers did not fade. They transformed. John D. Rockefeller Jr., called Jr., took the family's mission and redirected it entirely toward philanthropy and institution building. He constructed Rockefeller Center in the heart of Midtown Manhattan during the Great Depression, a project that covered 22 acres, created 14 buildings, and generated 75,000 jobs at one of the darkest economic moments in American history. He donated the land on the east side of Manhattan where the United Nations headquarters stands today. He funded the restoration of Colonial Williamsburg. His wife Abby co-founded the Museum of Modern Art.
If the Rockefellers built their empire on oil, the Lauders built theirs on a jar of face cream. That is not a dismissal. That is one of the most extraordinary statements in the history of American capitalism. Because the Lauder family, starting from almost nothing in the outer boroughs of New York City, built a beauty dynasty that today controls 30 brands, generates over $14 billion in annual revenue, and holds voting power over a publicly traded company that no shareholder revolt can touch. They did it in one lifetime, and then held on to it across 3 generations with a grip that has never loosened. Estee Lauder was born Josephine Esther Menser on July 1, 1908 in Corona, Queens. Her parents were Hungarian Jewish immigrants. Her father ran a hardware store. The neighborhood they lived in was not glamorous. The area near Flushing Bay was used as a garbage dump. Locals called the refuse heaps Corona Mountain. This was where one of the most powerful women in the history of American business grew up.
From childhood, Estee was acutely aware of class. She was ashamed of her parents' accented English and old world ways. She wanted desperately to be seen as refined, as sophisticated,
as 100% American. That hunger, that wound, became the engine of everything that followed. It gave her an obsessive, almost physical desire to understand what made wealthy women feel beautiful and to give it to them. Her uncle John Schatz was a chemist. He made skin creams in the family stable behind the house. As a teenager, Estee began learning from him, studying the formulas, experimenting with textures, understanding what the creams did to skin. She wasn't just interested, she was fascinated. She began selling the creams to neighbors, to women at her beauty salon, to anyone who would listen. She gave facials at the hotels where she and her family vacationed. She stopped women on Fifth Avenue to put cream on their hands. She talked her way into Saks Fifth Avenue when nobody knew her name and nobody was waiting for her. In 1942, she remarried her ex-husband, Joseph Lauder, a man who believed in her vision even when no one else did. And in 1946, to the protests of their lawyers and accountants who told them it would never work, Estee and Joseph incorporated the Estee Lauder companies and committed everything they had to making it succeed. They rented a former restaurant in Manhattan and literally cooked their beauty recipes on the restaurant's burners. Their eldest son, Leonard, who was 13 years old at the time, was delivering products to department stores on his bicycle. The family business was literally the family. Every member of the household was involved. Every sale mattered. What made Estee Lauder different from every other cosmetics company at the time was her marketing instinct. She invented the gift with purchase, the idea of giving women free samples with their buy. Every competitor's lawyer said it was financial suicide. Estee said it was the best advertising in the world. She was right. Once a woman tried the products and felt what they did to her skin, she came back. She brought her friends. The gift with purchase is now an industry standard used by every major beauty brand on earth. Estee Lauder invented it in the 1940s out of a rented kitchen in Manhattan. By 1965, Estee Lauder had become the fastest-growing beauty company in the United States. By the time Leonard Lauder became CEO in 1982, the company was already a global force. But under Leonard's leadership over the next 2 decades, it became something else entirely. He created the company's first research and development laboratory. He acquired MAC Cosmetics, Bobbi Brown, Aveda, La Mer, and Clinique, transforming a single brand family business into a diversified portfolio of the most prestigious cosmetics brands in the world. And in 1995, he took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange, raising over $450 million. Here is the extraordinary detail. When the company went public, the Lauder family structured the deal so carefully, so deliberately, that despite selling shares to the world, they retained approximately 86 to 87% of the voting power. Wall Street could invest, the public could own a piece, but the Lauders would always run the show. The board, the strategy, the future of the brand, all of it still answers to the family.
Leonard Lauder, who led the company until 1999 and remained deeply involved until his death in June 2025 at the age of 92, was one of the most consequential executives in the history of American consumer business. He was also one of the great art collectors of his generation, donating a Cubist collection valued at over $1 billion to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of the largest gifts in the museum's history. His brother Ronald took a different path. Ronald served as U.S. ambassador to Austria under Ronald Reagan, ran unsuccessfully as a Republican candidate for mayor of New York in 1989, co-founded the Neue Gallery of German and Austrian art on the Upper East Side, and in 2006 paid $135 million for Gustav Klimt's painting, Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, at the time the highest price ever paid for a painting at auction.
The third generation is equally embedded. Leonard's son William became executive chairman of the company. Ronald's daughter Erin is style and image director and runs her own Erin lifestyle brand. Ronald's other daughter Jane serves as chief data officer. 6 members of the Lauder family are currently actively engaged in the company they still control. The combined Lauder family net worth is estimated at approximately $33 billion. Not bad for a jar of face cream cooked in a rented kitchen in Queens. Most people have never heard the name Newhouse, and the Newhouse family would prefer to keep it that way. You have read their magazines. You have watched their television channels. You have scrolled through their digital media. If you have ever picked up a copy of Vogue, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Wired, or GQ, that was a Newhouse publication. If you have ever had Charter Spectrum cable service, the Newhouses had a significant stake in the company that provides it. If you have ever browsed Reddit, the Newhouses owned a piece of that too. The family controls one of the most powerful private media empires in the world, and they have done it almost entirely without a public face.
The story begins with Samuel Irving Newhouse, born in 1895 on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the son of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. His family was desperately poor. Samuel was the oldest of 8 children, and by the time he was 13, he was the primary breadwinner for the family, working whatever jobs he could find while going to school at night to educate himself. His break came in a way that sounds almost impossibly simple. A local judge named Hyman Lazarus had taken on a failing newspaper, the Bayonne Times in New Jersey, as partial payment on a debt. The judge had no interest in running a newspaper. He needed someone to manage it. Young Samuel Newhouse, who was working in the judge's law office at the time, raised his hand. He was 16 years old. Within a few years, Newhouse had turned the Bayonne Times from a money-losing liability into a profitable operation. The judge was impressed. Newhouse began acquiring papers of his own, then more. He had a genius for the economics of newspapers that went beyond editorial. He understood production costs, printing efficiencies, advertising rates, and how to run a lean, profitable operation better than almost anyone in the industry.
By 1922, he had formally established Advance Publications, which would become the holding company for his entire empire. Through the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, he kept buying. He never stopped buying. Long Island newspapers, Staten Island newspapers, Syracuse newspapers, Newark, Portland, Birmingham, city after city, he acquired the local paper, cut costs, improved operations, and moved on to the next acquisition. Then, in 1959, he made the purchase that transformed the company from a newspaper business into a cultural empire. He acquired Condé Nast Publications, the publisher of Vogue, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, and a portfolio of some of the most prestigious titles in American magazine publishing. The price was $5 million. In hindsight, it was one of the greatest media acquisitions in history.
By the time Samuel Irving Newhouse died in 1979, his company controlled 31 newspapers, 7 magazines, 5 radio stations, 6 television stations, and 15 cable channels. He had built it from a failing neighborhood newspaper taken as a debt payment by a local judge. He had never gone to college. He had never had a publicist or a press strategy. He had simply worked, acquired, and never stopped. His sons Samuel Cy Newhouse Jr. and Donald Newhouse inherited the empire, and, if anything, tightened the family's grip on it. Cy ran the magazine division and transformed Condé Nast into the defining force in global fashion and culture media. Under his leadership, Vogue became the most influential fashion magazine in the world. The New Yorker, which he acquired outright, became the gold standard of American journalism. He hired Anna Wintour as editor of Vogue in 1988, a decision that shaped fashion media for the next 4 decades. Donald took control of the newspaper and cable operations. The family eventually shifted its cable interests into major stakes in Charter Communications, making them one of the most significant shareholders in American cable television. They also took stakes in Discovery Networks and Warner Brothers Discovery. And in 2012, they invested in Reddit, then a niche internet community, which has since become one of the most trafficked websites on the internet and went public in 2024. Today, Advance Publications, still completely private, still entirely family-controlled, is one of the largest private media companies in the world.
The Newhouse family fortune is estimated at approximately $24 billion, shared among a small number of family members. They give no interviews about their wealth. They appear on no lists voluntarily. Their company files no public reports because it is not publicly traded. The Newhouse family has constructed their empire specifically to remain invisible to scrutiny.
A man who started work at 13 to feed his 7 brothers and sisters, who took a chance on a dying newspaper because no one else wanted it, who never had a formal education, built a dynasty so powerful that his grandchildren today own the publications that define culture, the cable networks that carry television into millions of homes, and a share in the platform where half the internet goes to talk to each other. And most people cannot tell you their last name. William Randolph Hearst is the man Orson Welles based Citizen Kane on. For those who haven't seen the film, Citizen Kane is a story about a man who becomes the most powerful media figure in America, builds a castle, surrounds himself with art and luxury, uses his newspapers to wage personal vendettas and shape public opinion, and ends his life alone with nothing but his possessions and his regrets. It is considered the greatest film ever made. The fact that a real American family was its direct inspiration tells you everything you need to know about the Hearsts. The Hearst story actually begins not with William Randolph, but with his father, George, a Missouri farmer and prospector who traveled west during the California gold rush and spent years searching for minerals across the American West. George Hearst had an almost supernatural instinct for the earth. He invested in mining ventures that seemed hopeless to others and walked away wealthy from every single one. His investments in the Comstock Lode in Nevada, the Anaconda Copper Mine in Montana, and the Homestake Gold Mine in South Dakota made him one of the richest men in America. He became a United States Senator from California in 1887. When he died in 1891, he left an enormous fortune to his wife Phoebe and to their only child, William Randolph. William Randolph Hearst was not the cautious, methodical businessman his father had been. He was something else entirely. A man of enormous appetites, enormous talent, enormous ego, and almost no self-restraint. He had been expelled from Harvard for pranking his professors. He lived on a $10,000 a month allowance from his mother at a time when that was a staggering sum. He spent money as fast as it arrived, and sometimes faster. But he was also a genuine genius of media. When his father gave him control of the failing San Francisco Examiner in 1887, William Randolph invested $8 million of the family's money and transformed it into the most popular paper in San Francisco. His method was sensational, lurid, emotional journalism, what his critics would call yellow journalism. Not always accurate, not always fair, but compelling in a way that sold papers like nothing before. He moved to New York and bought the New York Morning Journal in 1895. He went to direct war with Joseph Pulitzer's New York World for readers, cutting prices, hiring away Pulitzer's best journalists, running the most dramatic headlines imaginable. Some historians argue, with serious evidence, that Hearst's newspapers helped push the United States into the Spanish-American War of 1898 through a campaign of inflammatory and sometimes fabricated reporting about Spanish brutality in Cuba. When asked about the absence of a war to cover in Cuba, Hearst allegedly told an illustrator, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." Whether he said those exact words is disputed. That his papers inflamed public opinion toward war is not. By the 1920s, Hearst owned the first nationwide media chain in American history, 28 newspapers and 18 magazines, including the San Francisco Examiner, the New York Morning Journal, Harper's Bazaar, and Good Housekeeping. It was estimated that 1 in 5 Americans read a Hearst publication. He used that reach to influence politics, support candidates, destroy enemies, and shape the country's perception of reality to serve his interests and preferences. He also spent money at a scale that defies belief.
His castle at San Simeon, California, a 165-room estate on 250,000 acres, is one of the most extravagant private residences ever built in America. He filled it with art, antiquities, tapestries, ceilings from European castles, and a zoo. He hosted Hollywood stars and presidents. He employed servants and staff by the hundreds. At his peak, his collection of art and antiques was so large that it filled warehouses in New York and was still being sold off decades after his death.
By the 1930s, the spending had caught up with him. Hearst came perilously close to bankruptcy, a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, running out of cash because the pace of his consumption exceeded even his enormous income. The company's creditors stepped in to manage his finances. He had to give up his castle. It was a humiliation that consumed the last years of his life. When William Randolph Hearst died in 1951, his 5 sons took over the business. All 5 of them. The company was restructured under a trust designed specifically to keep control in family hands for as long as all of the grandchildren who were alive at William Randolph's death remained alive. It was a legal structure designed to prevent the fortune from fragmenting. The Hearst family, despite all the drama and spending of the patriarch, was not going to disappear. The Hearst Corporation today is a genuinely extraordinary media conglomerate. Under their ownership are 76 newspapers, 250 magazines, 35 television stations, and through a stake in A&E networks that they share with Disney, a significant ownership interest in ESPN, one of the most valuable media properties in the world. The company has aggressively modernized, expanding into digital media, data and information services, and financial intelligence through companies like Fitch Group. But the Hearst family story would not be complete without talking about Patty Hearst, because the dynasty's most extraordinary chapter did not happen in a boardroom. It happened on February 4th, 1974. On that night, Patricia Campbell Hearst, 19 years old, granddaughter of William Randolph, studying art history at Berkeley, was kidnapped from her apartment by a small, violent domestic terrorist group called the Symbionese Liberation Army. 3 members broke in, beat up her fiancé, and dragged her away blindfolded. She was held captive for 57 days in a closet, deprived of sleep, deprived of food, subjected to psychological manipulation and abuse that included rape and constant death threats. And then, in what became one of the most shocking and discussed events in American history, she appeared on camera robbing a bank, with a weapon in her hands, wearing a beret, working alongside her kidnappers. She had been given a new name, Tanya. When the FBI finally captured her in 1975, after 19 months on the run, the country faced a question it did not know how to answer. Was she a victim? A willing participant? A young woman broken by sustained abuse? Her trial became a national obsession. The prosecution argued she had joined voluntarily. Her defense, led by F. Lee Bailey, argued she had been systematically brainwashed. She was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 7 years. She served 22 months before President Carter commuted her sentence. In 2001, President Clinton granted her a full pardon.
Today, Patty Hearst is an author, actress, and charity fundraiser. She married her bodyguard, Bernard Shaw. Her estimated net worth is around $50 million. Her daughter Lydia, a model and actress married to comedian Chris Hardwick, is estimated to be worth $100 million. The current chairman of the Hearst Corporation is William Randolph Hearst III, great-grandson of the founder, who oversees a family fortune estimated at $22.4 billion, shared among more than 50 living heirs. From frontier mining to yellow journalism to kidnapping to cable television to ESPN, the Hearst name has never been boring, and it has never been gone.
Of all the dynasties in this video, the Ziff family made what might be the single greatest financial decision in the history of American publishing, and almost no one knows who they are. The Ziff story starts in 1927, when William B. Ziff Sr., a writer, advertiser, and entrepreneur from Chicago, started a small publishing operation.
Ziff's early magazines were niche publications aimed at hobbyists, aviation enthusiasts, radio operators, photographers. He had a talent for finding audiences that nobody else was serving and giving them exactly what they wanted. By the time his son William Ziff Jr. took over in the 1950s, the company had evolved from a small hobby publisher into a serious media business. William Jr. is the architect of the fortune that exists today. Under his leadership through the 1960s and 1970s, Ziff Davis Publishing, as the company was then known, became the dominant publisher of technology and enthusiast media in America. PC Magazine, launched in 1982, became the Bible of the personal computer industry. Car and Driver was one of the most respected automotive publications in the country. Popular photography, popular electronics, flying, boating, Ziff had the enthusiast reader covered from every direction.
By the early 1990s, the company was massive. It had revenues in the hundreds of millions. It was profitable, respected, and well-positioned. And then William Ziff Jr. began to think about timing. Because here is what he saw coming. He saw the internet. Not necessarily the specific form it would take. Nobody knew that in 1993. But he understood that the economics of print media were about to be fundamentally disrupted. Advertisers who were paying to reach enthusiast readers through magazines were about to have an alternative. Digital distribution would eat print's lunch. It was coming. He didn't know exactly when or exactly how, but he knew it was coming. In 1994, William Ziff Jr. sold Ziff Davis Publishing to a group of investors for $1.4 billion. In 1994 dollars. He got out completely. He took the money and he left. The following year, Netscape launched its browser and the World Wide Web went mainstream. Within 5 years, the advertising model that had sustained print magazines for a century began to collapse. Within 10, most of the titles Ziff sold were in financial distress or dead. The timing was not luck. It was vision.
William Ziff Jr. took the $1.4 billion and placed it with his 3 sons, Daniel, Robert, and Dirk, who used it to launch a private hedge fund. Over the following 2 decades, they grew those funds by approximately 10 times. 10 times! From $1.4 billion to somewhere in the range of $14 billion or more. When they closed the fund and returned capital to outside investors in 2014, the Ziff family walked away as one of the wealthiest families in New York, having turned their father's publishing exit into a financial empire. And then they did something unexpected. They bought the World Surf League, the global organization that runs professional surfing competitions worldwide, including the championship tour that decides the world champions each year. 3 financiers from New York Publishing owning the global body of professional surfing is one of the more surreal ownership stories in sports. But the Ziff family has always had a talent for finding niches that others overlooked. Today, the 3 Ziff brothers share a combined fortune estimated at approximately $18.5 billion. 3 people, $18.5 billion. No publicist, no media profile, no magazine cover appearances. Their grandfather started with hobby magazines in 1927. Their father saw the internet coming before most people knew what it was. Their generation turned publishing money into hedge fund billions. And now, they own professional surfing. The quietest $18 billion in New York.
5 families, 5 empires, 5 different stories about what it takes to build something so powerful that it survives not just one generation, but many. The Rockefellers, who turned a farm boy's discipline and a ruthless vision into the greatest industrial monopoly in American history. And then, when the government broke it apart, became philanthropists so influential that the family's name is carved into the foundations of medicine, education, and culture. The Lauders, who started cooking face creams in a rented kitchen in Queens and built a beauty empire that controls its own destiny, even as a publicly traded company. Because Estee Lauder understood that the most important thing you can own is not a building or a company, it is the vote. The Newhouses, who built a media empire from a dying newspaper taken as a debt payment, acquiring quietly and relentlessly for 6 decades until they owned the magazines that define fashion and culture, and then structured everything so carefully that the world barely knows their name. The Hearsts, whose founder used media to shape wars and elect presidents, whose family survived near bankruptcy, a kidnapping that became a trial of the century, and the collapse of print media, to emerge still standing, still relevant, still worth over $20 billion. And the Ziffs, who had the vision to sell $1 billion publishing empire 1 year before the internet made it worthless, invest the proceeds in a hedge fund, grow it tenfold, and end up owning professional surfing. New York has always had royalty. It just doesn't wear a crown. What these families share is not just money. It is patience. It is the willingness to think not in quarters, not in years, but in generations. It is the understanding that real wealth is not what you spend. It is what you protect, what you build, what you pass on. If this opened the vault for you, subscribe, because every week we go deeper inside the empires, dynasties, and hidden power that most people never see. The vault is open. See you inside.